Hey, 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 come on in, come on in. How you all doing and take, you know what I mean? We're about to get into another reaction here, another scary reaction, nonetheless. Excuse me. Someone suggested this vibe to me and thing, and thank you very much for the suggestion. I'm going to check it out. I'm into urban legends too. This one is urban legends that turned out to be true. Say what? They turn out to be true? Oh my goodness. No, that's supposed to scare because I mean, it's supposed to be fiction. It's supposed to be paranormal, unbelievable, but it turns out to be true. Let's go ahead and check out and see what they're talking about in this vibe here. Let's go ahead.
West Hobart Haunted House. West Hobart is an inner-city suburb located in Tasmania, Australia. Over the years, dozens of allegations of supposed hauntings, ghost apparitions, and other paranormal activity have been made by tourists and residents of West Hobart. And it's honestly not too hard to see why, as West Hobart is a pretty old town with a generally creepy vibe. As is usually the case, most of these stories have either turned out to be fake or the people making the allegations didn't have enough evidence to support their claims, which makes it almost entirely likely that they're hoaxes. But as it turns out, at least one of these stories actually has some amount of truth to it. Back in the late 80s and mid 90s, rumors started spreading of a house in West Hobart that was apparently so haunted it drove its residents insane. At first, the rumors created a huge buzz all over town, with the locals doing everything possible to stay far away from the alleged haunted house. It wasn't until months later that the authorities got involved and finally got a clear picture of the situation. While it was true that the house's residents appeared to be going insane, it didn't have anything to do with paranormal activity, but with the fact that a datura vine had been growing through the trees directly above the home and dropping leaves into the family's rainwater tank. For a long time, the family had been inadvertently consuming microdoses of the plant every single day, which made them slowly but surely start to lose their sanity as they sank further and further into delirium. In case you've never heard of it, datura is a species of plant within the nightshade family, also known as Jimson weed, the devil's weed, or devil's trumpet, and you'll see why in a second. Even though the plant itself looks pretty harmless, it's known for having extremely powerful hallucinogenic properties, which is why it was used for centuries by Native American tribes in coming-of-age rituals and other important ceremonies. The Aztecs also used datura as a painkiller in certain rituals, namely in ritual sacrifices, and it's also commonly used as an ingredient in the ritual of zombification in the Haitian voodoo religion, where it's referred to as the devil's cucumber.
Yep.
As you can probably tell by now, datura isn't your typical recreative hallucinogen, and there's a reason why it's really only ever used in hardcore spiritual rituals and ceremonies, and sometimes by naive people who have no idea what they're getting themselves into. In low to medium doses, datura causes extremely distressing, delirious experiences, and in higher doses it can lead to paralysis and even death. Nowadays, datura is recognized by most tribes as a highly toxic and dangerous plant, and have understandably stopped using it. Before we move on, I wanted to take a minute to talk about War Thunder, the sponsor of this video.
Wow, man, that's crazy. You understand? They were getting high in there and they don't even know it. Phew. Mother Nature is a hell of a thing, boy, you see, because that stuff was growing right there. They had a cash crop in the house. You could have sold that to some voodoo people, some natives, you know what I mean? Make a killing, you know what I'm saying? The thing. And you should
As of recently,
just
I've had a
get
growing
fire.
interest in history, specifically World War I and II, so when War Thunder reached out, it was perfect. War Thunder is an immersive, large-scale, realistic multiplayer action game where you take control of ground vehicles unique, the seek and destroy, and even more gifts. The American Vehicle bonus season will end
Let's
soon,
fast
so
forward
make sure
that.
you get in on it now.
Let's fast forward that
Cropsey.
game bit. Ooh, Cropsey.
If you were to somehow go back to the 70s and spend some time in Staten Island, it probably wouldn't take you long to hear about an urban legend of a man named Cropsey. As the story went, Cropsey was a serial kidnapper and killer who lost his son and resorted to stealing other people's children to deal with his grief. According to the legend, Cropsey also had a hook for a hand, scars, burns, and open wounds covering his entire face and body, and a generally horrifying appearance. Considering the mass areas of uninhabited woodlands, it's not all that unexpected that a tale like the legend of Cropsey would make it into the mainstream culture at some point. Unfortunately, this wasn't just a tall tale made up by Staten Island parents to keep their kids from venturing too far into the woods and getting lost. Although the legend has some obviously made up elements such as the hooked hand and the horrifying scars and burns, at some point in the early 70s, children in Staten Island really did start disappearing. That's when the line between legend and reality started to blur, and the story of the real Cropsey immediately replaced the urban legend. This is the real story. Andre Rand was a man from Manhattan who was
Oh
born
my
in
goodness.
1944 and moved to Staten Island in the late 60s.
That's an evil.
After working for 2 years at the infamously brutal Willowbrook State School for Children with Disabilities, Rand was arrested in 1969 and served over a year in prison for the attempted attack of a 9-year-old girl. As soon as he was released 16 months later, reports started cropping up of more little girls disappearing all over Staten Island, including 5-year-old Alice Pereira, who was playing in her building's lobby when she suddenly disappeared without a trace.
Wow.
Over the next decade, Rand was the prime suspect in the disappearances and deaths of several other young girls in the area. But it wasn't until 1983 when he picked up 11 kids from a local YMCA and brought them fast food before taking them to the airport that he was finally arrested and sentenced to 10 months in prison again. Throughout the 70s and 80s, dozens of young kids disappeared in Staten Island, and although Rand was often the last person to be seen with them, there was ultimately never enough evidence to put him away for a long time. For many years, he would often be seen hanging around young kids, going on walks with them, and even taking them to lunch and dinner with him at local restaurants. After years of letting him walk the streets as a free man, police would finally have a breakthrough in the case in 1987 when they found undeniable evidence that Rand had been behind the disappearance and murder of Jennifer Schweiger, a 12-year-old girl with Down syndrome. In 1988, he was sentenced to 25 years to life, and while he was behind bars, more and more evidence was found that tied him to several other disappearances in Staten Island in the 70s and 80s. Unfortunately, he was only charged with one additional major crime in 2004, which was the kidnapping of Holly Ann Hughes, thanks to which he will spend the next 13 years behind bars until 2037. If he lives that long, he'll be 93 by the time he gets out.
Okay. What I want to know is, what I don't know, of course, too, that was earlier on in the vibe. We have become, excuse me, a way more paranoid society. So maybe if that guy like that is roaming around the town, people are going to pay more attention. But my God, he's taking children out to dinner. He's taking children. So the whole time he's been suspected of all of this. He's taking kids out to dinner and stuff like that, you know. And I don't want to blame the parents, but if I see that man around my kid, I'll be like, hey, you got a reputation, bro. You know what I mean? And listen. One thing and an accuse happen, I'll be skeptical and go, okay, that could be rumors. But the fact that my man was in jail for doing this, my man took a busload of kids to the airport, and they still have kids, still kids go around him. What the bumble clot is that all about? You understand what I mean? Speaking of which, the urban legend. Tell me in the comment section, did you ever have anybody when you was a kid, an old person, that they say don't go next to, they're gonna do stuff to you? We had several of them. There was Crazy Lucy, who had to walk by her house to go to school on my way to school, because we walked to school down there. The school is not that far from home. But the one that I had an encounter with, well, I had a couple of encounters with Crazy Lucy and Mr. Alexander and a couple of the like scary older people. But the one that really scared me was Vong. I never know his real name. We call him Vong. That was his nickname. Now on the island, there's a folktale character called a Ligaroo, and it's basically a vampire. What they do is they spring into the night, becomes a ball of fire, so they could sneak into people's houses and suck their blood, right? Vong was proposed to be one of those Ligaroos. So I had this friend, his name is Roach, and I don't want to sound politically incorrect, but that's what we called him on the island back then. We call him Grenada White because he was super light skinned, right? Vong lived down the street from, not Vong, but I had my buddy Roach. He lived down the street from me with his mom. It was just him and his mom. One day I went there, I'm reading a book and tea, and I heard boom, 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 boom on the door. I look out, and there is Roach. Roach coming, and he's all mad and scared and anxious all at the same time. And he said, Vung, get my mother. I was like, what do you mean, Vung, get your mother? He said, Vung, suck my mother. so, So I do so, and I was like, man, what you want me to do, man? Man is a ligaroo, you know what I mean? And Vong was he always used to stand on the top of a hill called Market Hill. And you go down the hill and you go into the market square where they sell fruit and meat and all kind of stuff out in the open, you know? So, and the hill was right up the street from where we live. Like, Roach lived closer to it. And Roach was like, come, you go with me, we gonna get that bone. And I was like, boy, I ain't trying to mess with no damn ligaroo. You know, but I didn't want Roach to go alone. So I'm like, you know, pump up my little skinny chest and thing, follow him out there. You know, and he said, come, let me show you what he did to my mother. So we went into the house and thing, you know what I mean? And his mom come and she said, hi. And the mom had this big red mark on her neck. Now, the thing about the ligaroo on my island is that they don't bite you. They just suck on the vein and they get the blood that way. Hey, it's supernatural. You know what I mean? So his mom had this big red mark on her neck. I'm like, what the? Won't get her for real, for real. So later that evening, Vung is standing up on Market Hill, and let me tell you, Vung was scary. He had a big straw hat. He had a walking stick with a black string on it. You know what I mean? Like voodoo up the thing, man. My man was voodooed up. Eyes always bloodshot. You know, and he's always staring at you as you're walking by. You know, he never talked to anybody. So Vong is standing up there, Roach, and we creep up on Vong, and you know, and all of a sudden, you know, he wasn't even paying attention to us. All of a sudden, he went whoop, looked at us, and we froze, you know. And Roach is like trying to push me to go forward. I said, "Boy, it's your mother, it's not my mother." He's sucking. so, so Roach do so, and he started to walk up to Vong, and I follow him up. And Roach went to the sign of the cross because somebody told him if he did the sign of the cross, Vong's gonna melt. Vong did not melt. And Boom went, "Argh." Roach took off running, and I took off running after him. And a funny ending to that story there. I mean, Vung never did anything to us. You know, we were always scared of him. We'd always go around Market Hill to get home. But here's something funny. When I first arrived in America, I went to a place in Kentucky, and it was basically, I was a minority. It was more Caucasian people there. And I used to notice all these girls walking around with the big red marks on their neck. You know what I mean? I was like, oh my God, they have ligaroo in America too? It was later, somebody explained to me that that was a hickey. The ligaroos were dudes that were all hyped up and getting busy. Oh man, lesson learned. You see, and I only gonna say, you don't know what a hickey was, man. Where I'm from, it was like 90% black people then. And when I say black, I mean midnight black. So you don't see marks like that on the neck unless they light skin like Roach and his mom. You know, and when Roach showed me that to his mom's neck, that's the first time I've ever seen anything like that. I don't know what a hickey was, you know what I'm saying? Shoot, I didn't even know what it was until I came here and I see them little girls running around, them college girls running around with big ones on their neck. Let's get back to I'm talking too much here.
The Maine Hermit. The Kennebec Valley is one of the most beautiful regions in Maine, with over 5,000 square miles of forests, rolling hills, and natural paradise surrounding the Kennebec River. Many cabin owners of the North Pond area in the Kennebec Valley have described the area as the most peaceful place on Earth. But it hasn't always been that way. All throughout the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, there were reports of over 1,000 break-ins in the North Pond cabins. For decades, nobody knew who was responsible for the thefts, especially since they were always carried out when there was no one home. As the cabin owners soon noticed, the break-ins seemed to follow a pattern, always peaking in the days before Memorial Day and after Labor Day. As for the stolen items themselves, they ranged from food, to cooking utensils, to books, to propane tanks, to toiletries of all kinds. In the absence of a concrete suspect, the locals eventually named the thief the North Pond Hermit, even though by this point there was nothing to suggest the break-ins were being carried out by a single person. Although it wasn't uncommon for groups of homeowners to venture out into the woods to try to find the North Pond Hermit, they never found a trace, which only added to the legend's mystery. One afternoon in 2002, 100 people attended a North Pond homeowners meeting, and when someone asked how many of them had suffered break-ins, almost all of them raised their hands.
Oh, somebody's on a
As you can
spree.
probably guess, the North Pond hermit quickly turned into somewhat of a boogeyman, with the legend frequently being shared over campfires in the area. For years, nobody thought that the person or people behind the break-ins would ever be found. But in April 2013, a man named Christopher Thomas Knight was arrested in the middle of the woods in the North Pond area by an officer who had made it his sole mission to bring the thief to justice. As soon as he was brought to the police station, the cops asked him why he wasn't answering any of their questions. At first, it seemed as though he was having trouble speaking, but eventually he responded that he was ashamed of himself. As it was later revealed, Christopher had been living out in the middle of the woods by himself in an unheated nylon tent, surviving only on the things he stole from nearby North Pond cabins. Shockingly, he had survived winter temperatures of 20 degrees below zero for years and hadn't been to a doctor or taken any medicine for 3 decades. What's most incredible about the hermit's story is that for the entire time he lived in the woods, he didn't have a single conversation with another human being, except for one time when he ran into a hiker and only said hi. Understandably, Chris had lost interest in keeping track of time, so when he was asked how long he had been in the woods by himself, he replied, since the Chernobyl nuclear meltdown, which took place in 1986.
Wow.
As investigators later found out, he was 20 years old when he decided to become a hermit, just a couple of years after high school, although he never gave the authorities a real reason why he decided to disappear. In all his years of isolation, he went to extreme lengths to preserve his privacy. He never lit fires, only moved at night, and hadn't had any kind of communication with the rest of society for more than half of his life.
Wow.
He'd never driven a car, sent an email, or even known what the internet was until his arrest. Interestingly, as the cops dug deeper and deeper into his story, they realized that his only real possessions were his glasses, which he had been wearing for 30 years and could even be seen in his Lawrence High School yearbook picture from 1984.
Wow.
Everything else, down to his underwear and jacket, had been stolen. After the investigation, Knight was sentenced to 7 months in prison, after which he once again disappeared. According to the cops, he's now living a quiet, peaceful life in rural Maine.
Wow. He looked like he was bullied in high
Purple
school. He was
Aki.
like, screw the human race.
Throughout the late 1980s and 90s, rumors of a massive bodybuilder called Purple Aki began to surface in the northwest of England. According to the allegations, Purple Aki would supposedly walk the streets of Liverpool hunting down young muscular men and rugby players and oddly ask them if he would let them feel their muscles. If they complied, he would allegedly squeeze their muscles for much longer than was considered socially acceptable and would then ask them to perform squats so he could feel their quad muscles. Some teenagers reported that Purple Aki even went as far as to ask them to pose for him and often offered exercise and nutrition advice for those who gave him the time. Because the rumors were so incredibly ridiculous, nobody really took them too seriously at first, and eventually the story of Purple Aki turned into an urban legend with crazy details being gradually added to the tale, including one where Purple Aki would allegedly swallow teenagers whole if they let him feel their muscles. But as time went on, it became clear that Purple Aki wasn't just a made-up character created by bored teenagers looking to get some laugh from their friends, but a real person named Akinwul Arobic. Aki was often seen traveling across England by train carrying a plastic bag and asking young men if he could feel their muscles. Naturally, this made a lot of people uncomfortable, and it wasn't uncommon for Aki's face to be featured in local newspapers after several encounters with the law. Most of the accusations against him were related to his creepy behavior around teenage boys, but around 1986, the story of Purple Aki took a really dark turn.
Oh.
Early that year, 16-year-old Gary Keller was walking home from school when he ran into Purple Aki, who immediately asked to feel his muscles. Freaked out by the weird request, Gary said no and ran away. Later that same year, Aki followed Gary to a local outdoor swimming pool, and when the teenager noticed, he ran to New Brighton train station and jumped onto the railroad tracks to get away from Aki.
Ooh.
Sadly, the story ended in tragedy, as Gary was accidentally electrocuted by one of the rails. Considering the whole thing happened because Gary was being chased, Purple Aki was convicted of involuntary manslaughter, charged with harassing 14 different teenage boys, and sentenced to 2.5 years in prison. In 1988, Aki filed an appeal and complained that the only reason he had been convicted was because he was black. Ultimately, the judges agreed there wasn't enough evidence to prove Aki had been directly responsible for Gary's death, and believe it or not, he was freed and awarded £35,000 in compensation. Between 1988 and 2006, Aki went in and out of jail for failing to resist his compulsion to touch, feel, and measure other people's muscles, and in 2003 he was arrested for an additional 15 charges of harassment and witness intimidation, for which he was sentenced to 6 years in prison. Just like any other predator, he was also forbidden from waiting outside schools in the area. A few months later, he was jailed for 15 months for getting up to his same antics. Upon his release, he was once again arrested a few weeks later in 2010 and then again in 2015. After his latest release, he reportedly moved to Leeds, where rumors started cropping up that he had passed away during the pandemic. However, those rumors were put to rest when videos started surfacing in 2023 of Aki walking the streets of Leeds asking random dudes to, you guessed it, feel their muscles. As of today, Purple Aki is alive and well and will probably continue in his same behavior with or without permission for many years to come.
Man, that is bloody creepy. What? Listen, I am the most social person on the planet, but I don't want nobody coming up and feeling my muscles. What the bumbo clot? Not even women. If I don't know you, don't touch me. And I'll be honest with you, being 7 foot tall, people always want to come and, hey man, what's going on? Plop, plop, plop. You know what I mean? It's like, man, come on. Like I said, I'm super social. I'll hug people. But when it has to be a mutual thing. It's like, hey man, what's up? You know, or, hey, you know, what's up? But if you like pushing yourself on me and being aggressive, you gotta go. You understand what I'm saying? I'll tell you something that used to happen to me a lot. I used to have really long dreadlocks. I mean, I had it almost down to my ankles at one point, but not while I was here. But while I was here, I had it down to past my waist, you know, way down. That's way back in the day. The late 80s, all through the 90s, I had dreadlocks. Up until the mid 2000s. But, and I was in class at the university. I was sitting there and, you know, I had my dreadlocks was long, you know, and so it wouldn't touch the ground. I'd put it up on the chair, you know. So I'm sitting there and I was like one of the first people in that small West Virginia area that I lived in to have dreadlocks. So I do so and I'm sitting there, you know, mind my business and thing. I leaned forward and I felt a tug. And I turned around and there's some little girl playing with my hair. Everywhere I went, everybody's like, let me see, how do you do that? How do you do that? And they would play with my hair. And it's like, come on, man, what's up? You know, I'm not a novelty, you know, I'm not an exhibition. Stop playing with my hair. And that was really uncomfortable. So I can't imagine some big 6'5" dude coming up and say, hey, man, let me feel your muscle. Oh, no, let me tell you what you could eat and stuff like that. That's just creepy, dude. I don't know if that's something wrong with the dude or he's just really obsessed with fitness, but he doesn't look fit anyway. That's weird.
Laid Loyan.
But you know, to add to that, on the island, I knew guys that would do that. They'd come up and say, man, you have some muscle there. Older men especially, you got some muscle there, you know, and they'd be like, man, you skinny, man, you need to put some meat on that bone. And they'd like, you know, grab and feel your muscle, you know. So he seems to be from a different culture where that's probably older guys just do that to young people, you know what I mean? You need to be fit, man, you know. Hey, I'll tell you how to go running and stuff. They do that all the time. They used to do that when I was a kid on the island.
According to a Swiss urban legend, people have allegedly been running into a mysterious human-like figure in the Fribourg forest in the western part of the country near the town of Mals since the early 2000s. Based on the dozens of allegations that surfaced over the years, the figure has been described as being around 6 feet tall and always wearing a vintage-looking gas mask covering his entire face, a boiler suit, and a cloak. Most people who supposedly ran into the figure reported he or she was completely harmless, but this didn't make the encounters any less terrifying, and it wasn't uncommon for people to report the figure to the police when their children reported feeling scared. As expected, it didn't take local residents long to start adding their own crazy twist to the story, with some claiming that the creature was the ghost of a mentally unstable soldier, while other popular theories assured it was an alien. For a while, the story was classified as an urban legend, and the mysterious humanoid was given the name Laid Loyan, also known as the Ghost or the Hermit of Mals. Throughout the early 2000s, Laid Loyan was mostly the subject of local oral legend because there was no real evidence to support its existence. But in 2013, the story gained international attention when the Swiss/French newspaper Le Matin published the first ever photograph of Le Loyen, which was sent in by a hiker. After the photograph was published, there was no turning back, as people from all over the country started to make trips to the woods outside malls for a chance to catch a glimpse of Le Loyen. The last known sighting of Le Loyen took place in June 2013 when a local woman named Marianne Desclous saw the figure clutching a bunch of flowers as she was walking outside. Later that year, Le Loyen's clothes were found in the middle of the woods along with a wooden note titled "The Death Certificate and Will of the Ghost des Moles." In the letter, Le Loyen accused the media of having murdered a harmless being by revealing its existence and turning him into a circus freak. The letter also mentioned that due to the unwanted attention, Le Loyen had to abandon its daily walks, which were referred to as happiness therapy in the letter. After the cryptic note was published in the newspaper, many people concluded that Le Loyen had taken its own life, although this has never been confirmed. As of 2024, nobody has ever seen Le Loyen's true face, and many people have theorized that the figure was possibly a woman with a facial disfiguration who didn't want people to see her, which is supposedly why she wore the gas mask. But this line of reasoning will probably remain unconfirmed forever. The Bunny Man. In the early 70s, dozens of locals started reporting that a man dressed up as a bunny had started haunting the residential neighborhoods around DC, Maryland, and Northern Virginia. Although dressing up as a bunny in itself seems pretty harmless, what made the encounters a little scarier was that the guy would allegedly threaten children on the street with an axe and frequently vandalize people's property for no apparent reason. Even though sightings of the so-called Bunny Man were pretty rare, they seemed to follow a pattern, as the man usually appeared in secluded locations where there weren't a lot of witnesses. The story itself has a lot of elements of a typical urban legend and is kind of hard to believe, but through my research I found that it's all loosely based on a true story. In 1970, a couple was parked in a driveway close to a bridge on Colchester Road in Fairfax County when suddenly a random guy appeared out of nowhere, yelled at them for allegedly trespassing, and threw a hatchet at their car. Terrified, the couple left the area immediately before they had a chance to get a good look at the guy. As they reported the incident to the police, they mentioned the guy had been dressed in light-colored clothing and may or may not have been wearing something white on his head. Although the couple never mentioned anything about a bunny in their statement, as soon as the story hit the news, people started claiming that the hatchet thrower had been wearing bunny ears. Pretty soon, rumors of a man in a bunny suit threatening kids in the woods with a hatchet started surfacing all over the DMV area, and as the years went by, the stories got wilder and harder to believe. Over time, the legend of the Bunny Man has become pretty mainstream, with the bridge on Colchester Road even being renamed as Bunny Man Bridge. As of the uploading of this video, the legend has now been standardized and goes something like this. In 1904, there was allegedly an asylum close to the bridge on Colchester Road. As soon as it was built, a bunch of Fairfax County residents started complaining about the idea of having an asylum full of mental patients so close to their homes, so the authorities supposedly put all the patients in a bus and transferred them to a nearby prison. But on the way to the prison, the bus crashed and all the patients escaped. As the story goes, a few hours later the cops had successfully located and brought back all the patients except for one guy by the name of Douglas Griffin. This is where the legend gets a little weird. Allegedly, the fugitive patient hid in the woods from the authorities for weeks. As the days went by and the cops did everything to find him, rabbit corpses started to appear in the middle of the woods, which led everyone to believe Douglas was eating bunnies to stay alive. Then, one Halloween night, a group of kids were hanging out near the bridge on Colchester Road when they suddenly saw a blue orb flashing in midair. A second later, they were all strung up like bunnies hanging from the bridge. As the legend goes, if you go to Bunny Man Bridge on Halloween night at midnight, the same thing will happen to you. Obviously, none of this is true, but it just goes to show how much of an impact the story of the Bunny Man has had on mainstream Virginia, DC, and Maryland culture. Nowadays, there's even Bunny Man t-shirts, a Bunny Man horror movie franchise, Bunny Man beer, and everything in between. Needless to say, the area surrounding the railroad overpass near Fairfax Station is now a major attraction for both tourists and locals alike, and will probably remain.
You know, the story of urban legends and thing, you know what I mean? It haven't changed. It's always made up. Now, back in the day when there was urban legend, it was made up to scare kids from going to certain places or doing certain things. Nowadays, they just make it up to scare people, period. You understand what I'm saying? There's no rhyme or reason for it. There's no logic behind it. But you know, like back in the day, there was no street lights. There was nothing like that. And they don't want their kids to wander off into the jungles because everybody was living within nature, not destroying it to put down concrete buildings. So they would make up these urban legends, like the old lady who lived in the forest who takes kids and boils them in a pot and blah blah blah. So to stop kids from venturing out into the forest, you know, and getting lost, you know, or don't go into the river. You know, some creature is gonna come up and grab you. You know, that's a way of deterring children from going to swim in the river without their parents there. You know, nowadays though, it's just to scare you. Like there's one called the Mothman, that's famous in West Virginia, and I don't know what the point of it is really. You know, it's just the Mothman, and he's just there. However, there was a bridge. I think it was 1962 or something like that. I think it was sometime in the 60s. A bridge collapsed here in West Virginia, and it was said that the Mothman had something to do with it there, you know what I mean? But another thing that's really funny about urban legends is, as the years go by, people keep piling up more and more details as the years go by. So the original story of it is lost. You know what I mean? Because there are so many added layers that are put onto it, you know? You know, and just think about it, you know? And it's usually parents telling the kids these stories. And every time they tell these stories, they embellish it a little bit. When I was growing up on the island, the stories weren't really embellished. It was the same thing over and over. The Ligaroo did this to you. The Lajables did that to you. The Mama Melody did that to you. The Baku did this to you. You know, it was like standard. You know, there wasn't any additional stuff. Granted, each island have a different version of it. Like in some islands, depending on the culture there, the folktale character is a lot more vicious. Where I'm from in my country, it's real peaceful. Like, so you know, it wasn't like blood and gore stuff. You know, or folktale characters. They'll do stuff to you, you'll disappear. You know what I mean? And sometimes when you come back from some of them, you're what we call bazodi, which means you're off your rockers. You don't know what's going on and thing. But urban legends is like a cool thing to study. You know what I mean? Hey, hope you guys like that one. I leave links to other videos and stuff on there that you all could watch and think about ghosts and paranormal. And I have a couple about urban legends from way back in the day. Check those out. Check them out and subscribe if you haven't subscribed. Show some love with the hype button. Yeah, show some love with that, you know. People come and enjoy my stupid humor. But keep watching. And if you like the dark, this is a place for you.